back the whole world.
The sun had barely climbed over the jagged skyline of Los Angeles, casting long golden shafts between the steel teeth of downtown towers, when a homeless man unfolded a creased piece of cardboard, rested it gently against his knees, and took a deep breath. His hands trembled, not from the morning chill, but from something deeper, something like hope, or maybe the final surrender of it. His name was Jonah Miles, 59 years old, former literature teacher, former husband, former everything. His beard was a tangled memoir of unspoken days, peppered with gray, and his coat, a once olive trench, was now a patched archive of winters that had overstayed their welcome. He sat in his usual spot, cross-legged at the intersection of 7th and Figueroa, where bankers sped past like ghosts with earbuds and tailored shoes, where Teslas blinked silently at crosswalks, and nobody ever looked down. But today was different. Today, he held something in his lap. A sign. Not just any sign. Not the usual, hungry, please help, or will work for food. Jonah had written something else, something raw, something that had poured from him like blood in the night, scratched, onto a cardboard torn from the back of a dumpster behind a Whole Foods. It read, "I used to inspire minds. Now I ask for change. Life is strange." Before we go deeper, don't forget to like and subscribe, and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching this from. Your support changes everything. For 3 hours, not a single person stopped. Some glanced. Most ignored. One woman in yoga pants snapped a photo and kept walking. Jonah didn't blame them. He had stopped seeing himself long ago. It was close to noon when the car pulled up. A black, low-slung Lamborghini Urus. It idled at the light like a panther waiting to pounce. Then the tinted window rolled down. Inside was a man in his early 40s wearing a steel gray suit tailored like armor, aviator sunglasses, clean-shaven jaw like sculpted stone. His wrist sparkled with a platinum Richard Mille watch that probably cost more than Jonah had earned in a decade. The man looked at Jonah's sign, laughed loud enough for Jonah to hear it over the city noise. Then he pulled out his phone. "Hey, TikTok, check this out," he said, selfie camera raised. "So this guy says he used to inspire minds. Yeah, sure, bro. Now he's inspiring pigeons. Look at this poetry, man. Look at that cardboard wisdom. Maybe we should call him Professor Pavement." He laughed again. The light turned green. The car pulled away. Jonah stared at the empty street. He didn't even flinch. He had no anger left. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that the video uploaded instantly. 30 seconds. A billionaire mocking a homeless man's sign. The man was Damien Leclerc, tech CEO, crypto mogul, known provocateur with 100 million followers, and a taste for controversy. But this time the world didn't laugh with him. The video exploded. Not in support, but in fury. Within minutes, comments poured in. "This broke me. He used to teach. I'm crying. Who is he? We need to find him. We need to help." That line. It belongs on a t-shirt. By midnight, Jonah's words, that single sentence, were on Reddit, Twitter, Tumblr, and the front page of major news outlets. People didn't just share it. They connected with it. Deeply. Graphic designers started posting mock-ups of shirts and posters. Artists illustrated his sign, some adding angel wings behind Jonah's frame. Then came the entrepreneur. Her name was Zoe Tran, 31 years old, founder of Kind Thread Co., a small, sustainable fashion brand. She'd been scrolling TikTok when she saw the video, and her breath caught in her chest. Within 2 hours, she had designed a minimalist white shirt. On the front, "I used to inspire minds. Now I ask for change. Life is strange." Beneath it, small text, "Jag Jonah's." Sign, she listed it. On her website at midnight, just to see. Just to feel like she was doing something. By 2 a.m., she had 8,000 orders. By sunrise, over $3.2 million in gross sales. By the end of the day, the number climbed to 13 million. Celebrities reposted it. Teachers around the world wore it in solidarity. Jonah's face, captured from the billionaire's own video, was now on mural walls in Detroit, Melbourne, Cape Town. And yet, Jonah still didn't know. He woke the next morning in the same spot, unaware the world had shifted beneath him. That the words he had scrawled out of exhaustion had resonated with millions. That one cruel moment had turned him into a symbol. It was Zoe herself who found him. 33 hours after her shirts went viral, she arrived in LA with a camera crew, legal documents, and tears she couldn't explain. She walked up to him gently, crouched beside him, and whispered, "Mr. Miles?" He blinked. "Yes? I'm Zoe. You're all over the world, and I think you might want to see this." She held out her phone. A video played, a montage, clips of people wearing his words, teachers in classrooms, homeless shelters in Florida, little girls in tiny shirts with Jonah's sign across their chests. Jonah blinked again, then began to cry. Soft at first, then shaking, years of silence cracking open like a dam. I didn't think I still mattered," he said, voice breaking. "You do," Zoe said. "You never stopped, and that was just the beginning." The shelter smelled like warm bread and industrial soap, a strange combination of comfort and exhaustion. Jonah sat at a long metal table with a paper cup of coffee clutched between hands that had once held the pens of academia, now calloused and cracked by the streets. Across from him sat Zoe Tran, her phone still glowing, her voice trembling slightly from everything that had unfolded in the last 2 days. "I set up a trust in your name," she said, handing him a folder. "The designs were yours. The message was yours. The world responded to your words. You deserve every cent." Jonah didn't reach for the folder. He just looked at it. His eyes were swollen and red, not from sleep, but from the strange ache of being seen. "I'm just some guy," he said quietly. "I didn't plan it. That sign, I didn't even think anyone would read it." "That's why they listened," Zoe whispered back. "Because it was real." The legal documents sat between them like a bridge. $13 million in sales. After taxes, expenses, donations already pledged to literacy programs and homeless outreach, there was still nearly $4.2 million that now belonged solely to Jonah. "People are calling you the poet of pavement," Zoe added gently. "There's talk of a book deal, a speaking tour. Schools want to name scholarships after you. One principal in Chicago is reading your words over the intercom every morning before class starts." Jonah's hands shook, not with fear, no, something else. Something like the cautious return of dignity after years of starvation. "Why now?" he asked. "Why did the world listen now?" Zoe looked down for a moment, then back at him. "Because the wrong person tried to silence you. And it made everyone finally hear you." Meanwhile, on the 34th floor of a glass office high above the city, Damien Leclerc was on his 5th espresso and his 3rd PR crisis in 48 hours. "Don't post anything," his manager barked. "No apology, no memes, no ironic damage control. The internet is not laughing with you this time." "I was joking," Damien snapped, pacing in front of a massive aquarium wall filled with neon jellyfish. "You think they don't get it?" They got it, and they didn't like it. Across the world, millions had unfollowed Damien. Sponsors backed out. His NFT platform lost $80 million in valuation overnight. The hashtags "A Fire Damien" and "Jonah Sign" were now trending above international news. But Damien didn't care about the followers. Not really. He cared that he had been the punchline, that a homeless man with a cardboard sign had become more powerful than his years of boardrooms, billion-dollar valuations, and brand building. "You want to fix this?" his agent finally said. Meet him, in person, publicly. Apologize. Make a donation to his cause. Be the bigger man. Damien laughed bitterly. Be the bigger man by kneeling to the guy I mocked? Yeah, real PR gold. But even he couldn't deny it. This wasn't going away. And so, grudgingly, he agreed. 3 days later, Jonah was seated on a stage under a white tent in front of a crowd of press, students, activists, and ordinary people holding up handwritten signs that echoed his words. Life is strange. I used to inspire minds. Now I rise. He wore a clean shirt, hair trimmed, face shaved, though the years remained in the deep lines around his mouth and the distant sadness behind his eyes. Beside him, Zoe sat with her hand resting gently on a folder, marked Jonah Miles Foundation for Dignity and Literacy. A hush fell as Damien walked up the steps. He wore a simple black suit this time. No sunglasses, no watch. He approached Jonah slowly, then turned to the microphones. I was wrong, he began. I thought I was making a joke. But I made myself the joke. He paused, looked at Jonah. You wrote something real, and instead of recognizing that, I tried to humiliate you, but you rose. Your words rose. And now, I kneeled to them. He took a knee beside Jonah and offered a check. $1 million made out to the foundation Zoe had helped create. Jonah didn't take it. Not immediately. He just looked at the man who had once laughed at his pain and said, I accept the gesture, but not for me, for the minds we still have a chance to inspire. The crowd erupted, and just like that, the world watched a moment that was supposed to be humiliation become a triumph of grace. But Jonah's journey was far from over, because what he did next with the foundation and the hidden letter he received that very night would change everything again. The world loves a redemption story, but Jonah Miles never asked for one. He wasn't seeking sympathy, applause, or revenge. The moment the cameras stopped flashing and the microphones were silenced, he stepped off that stage and back into a reality that still felt foreign in its comfort. It had only been a few days since he'd last slept beneath a collapsing billboard, using a dog-eared copy of Leaves of Grass as a pillow and a flattened pizza box as a mattress. Now he stood in the penthouse office of Zoe Tran, floor to ceiling, windows wrapping around the room like a panoramic theater of the city that once swallowed him whole. He wore new shoes, stiff leather that hadn't yet molded to his step, and in his hand he held the same piece of cardboard. Laminated now, framed, but still the same uneven letters faded at the corners. I used to inspire minds. Now I ask for change. Life is strange. You don't have to carry it anymore, Zoe said gently, gesturing to the frame. It served its purpose. Jonah shook his head. It didn't serve me. I served it. That sign, it reminded me I still had something to give. The foundation had already raised more than $18.4 million in pledges, grants, and matching donations. Zoe had connected him with teams of educators, non-profit leaders, and public speakers who saw in Jonah what the world had tried to forget, that wisdom, resilience, and humility were not things you could buy or brand, but for Jonah, the fame wasn't the point. He wanted to give others what had been denied to him for years, a voice. In a dusty classroom in Inglewood, a 15-year-old named Calvin stood up during writing hour and read a poem that made his teacher cry. He'd written it on a napkin because he didn't have paper at home. His mother was working 2 jobs, and he hadn't seen his father in 3 years. He ended his poem with the line, I am not poor, I am unfinished. That line traveled from the classroom to social media to local radio and eventually to Jonah's ears. Jonah visited that school a week later, not with cameras, not with press, just himself, a man who knew what it meant to be unfinished. He sat with Calvin under a stairwell while other kids ran past them, laughing. "You know," Jonah said, "I was a teacher once. I forgot what it felt like to look a student in the eyes and see a fire burning." Calvin looked down. "They say I'm just a statistic." Jonah leaned in. "Then let's break the math." Jonah's foundation began funding student-run literary magazines in underserved schools, not glossy, over-edited publications, but raw, printed on cheap paper zines with scribbled margins and art drawn in pen. They called the initiative Cardboard Voices. Kids from Detroit to Dallas, from Compton to Camden, were mailing in poetry, short stories and handwritten letters with aching, beautiful words that bled honesty. Jonah read every single one. And when a 12-year-old girl in Baltimore wrote, "I live with my grandma. Sometimes I think we're invisible. But Mr. Jonah, when I see your sign, I think maybe invisible people can make loud echoes." He flew to Baltimore with a crate of notebooks and said nothing during the assembly, just handed out every notebook, himself, one by one, like they were medals. Meanwhile, Damien LeClaire had all but disappeared from the media cycle. Publicly, he had done his part, donated, apologized, kneeled. But privately, his empire was trembling. The controversy hadn't just cost him followers, it cost him leverage. Investors grew wary. Board members became impatient. And one evening, as Damien scrolled through videos of students performing Jonah's poem at a Chicago arts festival, his assistant walked in with a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside, a photograph of Jonah sitting with a group of teenagers in a circle, listening, laughing. One student was handing him a sandwich. Another was braiding a girl's hair while she read aloud. And under the photo, scribbled in rough but deliberate letters, "This is what power looks like. Unpaid, unafraid, no signature, no demand, just a truth." Damien stared at it for a long time, then looked out the window of his 47th floor condo and whispered, "I missed it, didn't I?" Jonah, however, hadn't missed a thing. In an old post office building downtown, he was helping renovate a space that would become the headquarters of Cardboard Voices. It had once been filled with pigeons and dust. Now, walls were painted with murals, students' poetry turned into street art. One wall bore his original quote in black cursive. Another held new words, painted by a 10-year-old from Oakland. "We are not lost. We are just not yet found by the right eyes." Jonah stood in the center of it all, arms folded, tears behind his lashes. Zoe walked beside him, holding an envelope. "You got a letter from someone in Maine. It's strange." Jonah opened it slowly. Inside was a check. $500,000, a note, one sentence. "Your word saved my son from ending his story too early." There was no name, just a postmark. Jonah sat down, the envelope trembling in his lap. "Zoe," he said, "what are we supposed to do with all this?" Zoe smiled. "We speak, we listen, we let the echoes grow louder." And so, Cardboard Voices expanded. To juvenile detention centers, to rehabilitation programs, to shelters. Jonah visited a prison and sat with lifers who read him lines they'd written under flickering lights. One man, covered in tattoos, wept. As he read, "I buried my voice so deep I didn't think it would sprout again. But your story made me water it." And then came the invitation, the National Educators Summit, an annual gathering of the nation's top scholars, administrators, and thought leaders. The keynote speaker had dropped out. They wanted Jonah. He hesitated, not out of fear, but respect. He had once stood behind a lectern in corduroy and elbow patches lecturing on Whitman. Now he stood in donated clothes, holding a past scarred by silence. But he accepted. On stage, under chandeliers and cameras, he stepped to the mic, took a deep breath, and instead of reading from prepared notes, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the cardboard sign. "I brought this," he said, "because this taught me more than any degree ever did." The room was silent. This cardboard, this was my paper, my pen, my megaphone. I didn't write it to be clever. I wrote it because it was the last thing I had to say, and somehow it spoke louder than anything I ever taught in a classroom. People wept. He didn't preach, didn't posture, just told the truth, that sometimes brilliance hides behind grime, that sometimes wisdom sleeps under bridges, that sometimes a sentence on a piece of trash can pull a drowning soul to the surface. He ended with this: "Don't wait until someone is viral to listen. Some of the greatest authors of our time are writing poems on cardboard and napkins. Find them, read them, answer them." A standing ovation, not out of politeness, out of reverence. But as he stepped off that stage, something else waited. A woman, mid-60s, nervous smile, hands shaking. "Mr. Miles," she whispered. "My name is Judith. I used to work with your wife, before the accident. She wrote something for you. I've kept it. For years." She handed him a folded paper. Old, fragile. Jonah took it, heart pounding, hands numb. Inside, in his wife's handwriting, "If the world ever forgets your worth, write it back into the sky. And if you fall, I promise, the words will catch you." He fell to his knees, not in grief, but in awe, because somehow her words had found him, just when he needed them, and he knew, deep in his soul, the final chapter of his story was yet to be written. They say some storms leave scars, and others carve rivers. Jonah Miles had lived through both. His story had rippled through alleyways, classrooms, boardrooms, and prison walls. But as the world watched him rise, no longer homeless, no longer silent, Jonah was still learning how to carry the weight of being seen, of being heard, of becoming unintentionally a lighthouse in a world full of shipwrecked souls. But what the world didn't know was that Jonah was not done writing. Not yet. Not by a long shot. The night after the summit speech, the one that had already been, shared by every major outlet and printed in the New Yorker, Jonah returned not to a penthouse or hotel suite, but to the modest apartment Zoe had helped him find in Echo Park. A one-bedroom with second-hand furniture, a balcony overlooking a crooked alley, and a bookshelf built from old milk crates. It smelled of fresh paint, lavender detergent, and the smallest hint of pencil shavings. On the balcony, he lit a candle. Not for the atmosphere, for memory. His wife, Miriam, had always lit candles before she graded papers. It was her way of holding back the world, creating a space that belonged only to thought. The letter he'd been given, her letter, sat on the table beside him. He had read it 37 times in 2 days. If the world ever forgets your worth, write it back into the sky. And if you fall, I promise, the words will catch you. That sentence had changed everything. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he wrote. Not on cardboard, not on napkins, but in a battered composition notebook with his name scrawled on the cover in blue ink. Page after page poured out of him. Poems, essays, fragments of memories, anecdotes of his students, stories of the people he'd met in shelters. Things no one had asked to hear, but that needed to be said. By sunrise, he had written 11,300 words. 3 months later, the Cardboard Chronicle hit bookstores across the country. A collection of stories, poems, and reflections penned entirely by Jonah Miles. It opened with the full story of his rise, not the viral version, but the real one. It included the names and voices of the countless people he'd met in shadows, those the headlines never named. Within days, it topped bestseller lists. But Jonah refused the term celebrity. "I'm not famous," he told every interviewer. "I'm finally visible." And still, the world wasn't finished echoing. In a small courtroom in Northern California, a judge sat silently while a young man named Michael Vega stood shaking beside his public defender. Michael had been caught spray painting a mural under the Interstate Bridge. The mural read, The world doesn't break you. It just dares you to rebuild yourself. Jonah Miles Michael had quoted Jonah without even realizing he was quoting a public figure. When the DA pushed for community service and a fine, Michael's lawyer submitted a letter. Not just any letter, a personal one, written by Jonah himself, in D. He wrote, "If we punish art done in pain, we only teach silence. I ask this court to see not vandalism, but voice." The boy didn't deface a wall, he decorated a truth. The judge read the letter out loud, then dismissed the charges, then called Jonah personally and asked to purchase 200 copies of the Cardboard Chronicle for a juvenile program. Jonah didn't charge him. He sent 400, with a handwritten note inside each one. Meanwhile, Damien Leclerc's silence had grown louder than his arrogance ever had. In his private compound outside Jackson Hole, he'd spent months off-grid. He no longer attended galas, no longer posted. His personal worth had shrunk, but for the first time in his life, he began to question what worth truly meant. One evening, as snow began to fall softly outside, Damien sat by a fire and opened an old email folder he hadn't touched in over a year. It was titled Letters to Myself. One draft stood out, dated the day he posted the video of Jonah. It read, "You've built towers from code and currency, but nothing you've made breathes. Nothing weeps, nothing saves. Maybe, just once, listen instead of leading." He never sent that letter. But he did something else. He requested a meeting with Jonah, privately. No press, no PR team. Just two men and a quiet bench in MacArthur Park. Jonah arrived on foot, hands in his pockets, the cardboard sign tucked under his arm. Damien was already seated, nervously adjusting his scarf. "I'm not here to make amends," Damien began. "Not because I don't want to, but because I don't know if I can." Jonah sat beside him, silent. Damien looked down at the pond where ducks drifted past like memories. "I mocked you," he whispered, "and the world gave you grace. I don't think I deserve any." Jonah looked at him then, deeply. "You didn't deserve to become the villain, but you chose to be. And the beauty of choice," he said softly, "is that it doesn't end when the credits roll. You're not done yet, so don't act like you are." Damien blinked, looked away, then nodded. "You ever miss teaching?" he asked. Jonah smiled. "Every day." "I want to learn," Damien said, "if you'll teach me." And so they began. Not as friends, not yet, but as something braver. Two men, one fallen from grace, one risen from ashes, sitting together, quietly rebuilding a bridge with nothing but silence and sincerity. Years passed. Cardboard Voices became an international movement. Jonah declined television shows, awards, and most interviews, but he accepted one rare honor, the National Medal of Humanities. At the ceremony, he spoke for only 90 seconds. "I spent years being unseen, and I'll tell you something I learned during that time. The world isn't blind. It's just distracted. But when you whisper truth into its ear long enough, eventually it looks up." And then, with trembling fingers, he held up the sign. Once more, the president himself bowed his head. When Jonah passed away, quietly, at age 76, in his sleep, surrounded by people who had once been lost boys and girls turned leaders, teachers, artists, the world mourned not as if a man had died, but as if a constellation had gone out. At his funeral, 1,000 people gathered, teachers, students, formerly homeless men and women, children with notebooks, billionaires who had been humbled, singers who had sung his words, authors who had been inspired by his poems, and Zoe, older now with streaks of silver in her hair, stepped up to the podium and read from a worn notebook. It was Jonah's last poem, unpublished. "I wrote on cardboard because it was what I had, but what I gave the world wasn't cardboard. It was my last thread of voice, and somehow you sewed it into a flag. The crowd wept, and in schools across the nation that poem now sits above chalkboards. Not because Jonah Miles was once homeless, but because he proved, beyond doubt, that sometimes the most important voices come from the quietest corners. And because he taught the world something it had nearly forgotten. That dignity is not granted. It is spoken into existence, even if all you have